scale basically is 7 notes, and then the leading note is the 8th note again. It just repeats itself. So 1 becomes 8. So it's really 7 notes with the lead note on the end, which is the 8th. Here's how to practice your scales. Basically what you want to do is you want to start going up the keyboard and down the keyboard, okay? Your 8 notes up and then backwards. So when you think of the keyboard, you see a series of black notes and white notes. These are more natural in a sense, and then when you go up to another like increment or like movement, if you were to go a little bit to the right in your movement and you walk up the keyboard, that's sort of considered sharping. And if you were to walk down, say the opposite direction, it's basically considered like flatting the note, okay? So if your root note was C and you wanted to go down a half step, you would take yourself to B. So the keyboard is laid out alphabetically and numerically, okay? So rule number 1, every note has a scale attached to it, and the black notes are usually sandwiched in between, right in between the white. And these guys here, they sort of have what I like to call a dual meaning. So although you can move up and it becomes C sharp because of the direction, if you're a whole step up on D and you go down a half step, it becomes D flat. So therein lies that dual meaning. I want to start out with the key of C, or the C note rather. I want to look at the scale of C, D, E, F, and G. Just want to get you familiar with, some of the most logical keys that you'll be playing in, especially for the beginner. So what we want to do is we'll go on the right hand and we'll look at the C scale, and we'll start on C. Okay, and as you do it, think of the, alphabetically. Think of it also with numerically. So again, the key C note and the scale of C. Okay, and move up a whole step. Let's go to D. D major scale. Okay, one more time. Okay, now let's go to whole step up to E. You don't want D, you want D sharp or E flat. So let's do E one more time. Awesome. Okay, half step to F. So right here, this guy. And you're going to see in a minute why it's really important to know, get the idea of walking up and down in your scales, okay? Let's jump up whole step to G. Walk it back down. Okay, toggle back and forth, got that octave. So those are C, D, E, F, and G major scale examples, all right? So if you get it in one key, really that's the thing, you can get it in all keys, okay? The scales are useful for 2 main things, and I'm going to demonstrate this for you. What you could do is you can take a portion of a scale and sort of use it in those spots where the songs breathe, and we'll talk about how to do that. And secondly, the scales are very useful for finding melody. If you don't understand, the whole idea behind melody and the fact that scales are important to find melody, we can go back to the old adage of, the kindergarten songs, and you think of Mary Had a Little Lamb. And basically it's, you have things like, okay, so what you're doing is you're hearing the keyboards simulate basically what a voice would do. So I don't know where you're at in terms of defining melody, but I don't play a lot of melody, but it has a lot of good uses. It is useful for when you're just starting a song and the band just kicks it up, and maybe you just start with the chorus and you start in such a way that allows people to maybe hear the notes of a song, and they can kind of get the idea of what you're playing until it's actually time to sing. Then you can just back off and do regular chords. You want to learn how to portion out your scales, okay? So an example of that would be to just take a couple of notes of the scale separated, like the 1 and the 4, okay, and maybe bounce them around like that. Instead of your traditional walk up, you would begin to portion out the scale in your practice. So one other way in your practice to use a scale would be to take your pinky and your thumb and use that octave method. Okay, so you go C to the next C in the lineup. Okay, so you would just, in sequence, you would practice octaves for your scales. And then basically you would just practice your scales in the, like, all of the various types of scales. Today we're covering major, and what you would do in your own personal time is cover not just major but minor, blues scales, and you would do that in all 12 keys. How do you create big worship using this scale technique? So as we said in the beginning, using portions of scales for fills is a really cool thing. So once you get familiar with chords, you'll start to know your progressions and what chords belong to the root note that you're playing in, okay? So with our example being C, I'm just going to play a chord progression that I typically would play on a Sunday, maybe during prayer, and I'm going to show you where those sort of spots that breathe, and some of the sections that might have some space to it where you just are sustaining a note, and you can use that scale fill, okay, to create a bigger flow and more useful fills to really enhance and create that bigger worship. Now what's going to happen is I can just take a second and break away and use that scale fill like so. Okay, so what just happened there in an effort to enhance what we're doing is basically, like I said, I just took a portion of the scale and I incorporated it in my playing. It's going to take getting used to because, newbies tend to get glued to, one zip code, and it's very difficult to, just fluidly move your hand, into a section that, whoa, I never played way up here. It's a little bit scary. It does take a little time, but once you start to break out and you start to get fluid, and God will give you that freedom, just take a section of the scale, okay? And, I choose how I want to arpeggiate it. I mean, there's things that I just gravitate to, things that I'm just accustomed to doing that I've learned on my own, and they seem to work well. So I can take portions of the scale. I can take the scale in octaves. Okay, but the point is that you are branching out, you are moving out, and if you just see my hands, and then I walk up to the F. You just choose what you want to do, okay? It doesn't have to be that elaborate. You can just do 1 or 2 notes. but you know, it's getting you out of that comfort zone. It's getting you out of that shell, okay? So there's a little bit of example about, you know, creating that bigger worship just by way of using scale fills, okay? I'll give you an example of using it in an octave sense. Okay, there's your pinky thumb. You incorporated that movement. I mean, if you were in a different key, go up to D. Okay, you're just applying the same concept to a different key. Just be careful, again, with things like the pedal, things like scale fills, melody, all things you want to bear in mind not to, how can I say, overuse it. Okay, with music, more often than not, less is more. So that's a good rule to live by. Start using those scale fills, and it will definitely enhance your sound, and it will help you to develop big worship.